How to start a React project in 2023. As someone who just decided to learn React and modern JavaScript after 1.5 decades or so of not programming in JavaScript at all, in the past month or two, I've been extremely frustrated by the documentation in particular and the whole state of flux that it's in general. When I started with React, all the tutorials guides on the site said, "This is the old documentation. It's about to be replaced," on every single page. Still, I worked through it and learned a bit. But by the end of working through it, I figured, well, I might as well click the link that's on every page and see what modern React is like. So I tried to follow one of their guides and had issues with the very beginning. But I knew enough React to know what to do to fix the issue, so I did, and proceeded with the new guide, only to hit more problems immediately after that. So I gave up and just stuck with the old way to do React. But then, just 1 week after all those issues, the new docs were switched over to be the main docs. I'm honestly kind of afraid to try to work through them again and see if they fix them already. And now I just read this article, and, well, I'm even less motivated to get into this stuff. Is this just a really bad time for React? Or is it always such a chaotic changing climate around it? Unpopular opinion. Like most frameworks, things are moving far too fast to be beneficial. I've been in the development community since the mid-late 80s, and I've been a web developer since the early 2000s. Yet I still cannot keep up with the latest and greatest from the technologies I work with, which change both one job to the next, as well as one project to the next in many cases. Angular lost me going from 1.2, for example. Not because Angular 2 was bad, but because they decided they needed to do a fresh start. Vue 2, greater than Vue 3 is almost the same story, though I stuck with that one. Rails. Oh boy, PHP. That is a damn nightmare. Tell me without looking at the docs what the best practices should be for even the most basic stuff. If I have to rewrite large portions of my code for a new revision, even a major one, you are most certainly doing it wrong. If you want to rewrite the project, at least care to add a compatibility layer, which some projects have done, but most have not. The really frustrating part to me is that every year the front end claims they have finally slowed down and that things are stable. I just did the Create Next app, and I can't claim that all of that is not eventually needed in some form or the other. However, it is mind-blowing that I think I know how to hello world a video game with less crap here. That point is crazy to me. Yes, if you are making a multi-platform game, you will need a ton of boilerplate. Will far outstrip the boilerplate that this React thing gave me. Same for if you have a large team building a web-based application. However, for dipping your toes into the front-end part of a web page, it is boggling to me that they also push so much on you that are not directly front-end concerns. Worse, there is a ton here to help with fast web pages. Problem is, most of the slow pages out there are slow because the teams just can't keep up with all of these shifts in how you are supposed to do things. Every page that is actually fast simply stayed with how to do things years ago. Problem is, most of the slow pages out there are slow because the teams just can't keep up with all of these shifts. Not really. Most pages are slow, not because they're using outdated techniques, or they're still serving everything from a large Windows server running an ancient version of .NET. Those old React pages aren't slow either because they didn't keep up. They still run fine. Pages are slow because of the obscene amounts of tracking and user conversion techniques. Banners, notices, trackers to make note of everything you do on the page, trackers to make note of errors, third-party trackers, ads everywhere, because a simple static one isn't good enough. List goes on. Guess what those old pages that stayed fast don't have? You guessed it, all those BS trackers. They weren't readily available back then. I didn't mean that old React pages are slow. I meant sites that started on old React and kept trying to keep up with all of the newest best practices throughout the years are slow. Typically because they do too much on the web app and don't treat it as a guy only. The last web app I looked at in the old job was literally as much code as the entire backing service for it. I don't know how to justify that. And yeah, for public sites, tracking almost certainly dominates how slow things are. I was thinking of internal tooling sites. I remember how fast many of the tools were when I started at the last job. I also remember how slow all of them were getting as I was leaving said job. It is more than a touch insane. As someone who just decided to learn React and modern JavaScript after 1.5 decades or so of not programming in JavaScript at all. Sorry you're experiencing this. It's not just React though, it's pretty much all JavaScript or TypeScript now. Especially front-end, but I swear, JSTS on the front or back is like trying to learn to drive a car in heavy traffic while also repairing the brake lines which are malfunctioning. For context, I'm a specialized back-end, but with a lot of experience in desktop GUI game engine stuff. Dev and I also wanted to learn React recently to round off my skills and be more marketable in the job market. Like yourself, I also prefer written docs, but trying to find such structured info was an exercise in futility. At the end, I used my existing Pluralsight subscription and went through the React 18 path they have, which is around 18 hours or so in total. The courses covered different topics around React like components, hooks, testing, etc. Good thing is the courses also have full transcripts. I followed them along and created some small apps myself in the process. Now I'm pretty much sure I can handle working with React in a normal job setting. You might want to consider that option. To be honest, Faye seems like programming on easy mode compared to some of the things I'm used to working on in my day-to-day. If you are an experienced programmer, you should have no problem getting caught up to speed on that relatively quickly. As someone who just decided to learn React and modern JavaScript after 1.5 decades or so of not programming in JavaScript at all, in the past month or two, I've been extremely frustrated by the documentation in particular and the whole state of flux that it's in general. As someone who was in a similar boat 2 decades of net essentially with a lot of Hot.js but no frameworks, I found jumping into Angular very nice in this regard. New versions every 6 months, but not with changing things for the sake of change. Actual small but incremental improvements. The documentation I found to be great, and since it is opinionated, it's easy to jump between multiple projects and not feel completely lost. It seems a lot of flack that Angular gets is because it is opinionated, but I look at this as a major positive. I've jumped between React projects and have been bewildered at how different they all are. The whole framework versus library thing. Does anybody else think it's extremely damning that a mature framework such as React still has no agreed-upon way to start a project? One of React's initial selling points was that it was a library, not a framework. React is unopinionated, etc. Perhaps some opinion might have been better in hindsight. How is React new not a thing? At this time in my life, learning to do front-end work at work seems to be more difficult than reading and understanding the LLM paper from OpenAI or Stephen Wolfram. How LLM works lengthy article. I did some front-end work in the first 3 years of my career in server-side render with JSP. We added jQuery and the likes, and it felt little complicated but manageable. Then I become mostly back-end-ing for the next 14 years. Now I feel like the dumbest folk in the group when it comes to talking UI framework. I know how those stuff works, but the process to put them all together is akin to pulling teeth. And then there is a recent discussion at work about going back to SSR with hydration and get rid of React altogether. Hydration SSR, improving response time by lower round-trip calls. Geez, we did that in the early 2000s. Somehow I can't help but thinking the way of shit we are in now. Maybe because of the ZIRP which is ending now. Maybe I can take a deep breath and say, things will be back to normal for fuck's sake. Sorry for the rant. So we're back to the old pre-SPA web, and even have a term for it. MPA. If I build an MPA, why should I choose Astro if I can choose Rails? That's a serious question to the HN community, not a rhetorical one. Would very much love to learn if there's something new here. TypeScript. Rails is faster for building an MVP. But it's significantly worse than a project built with a typed language when it comes to extending and maintaining. I thought I had misconfigured Sentry for error logging, because the type of errors that plague Rails, or any language that is not typed, just don't happen with a typed language, unknown method called on nilclus. We can decide to make a column in the DB to no longer allow null values, and we are immediately notified by the TypeScript compiler about every line that needs to be updated. A bit unrelated, but what happened to Angular? I was fully expecting to see a one-liner for this article, npx create next app. I think this article overstates the disadvantages of using a framework like Next is. If you don't want to work on the bleeding edge, then don't upgrade right away. That's true of literally every library out there. And it's trivial to host a Next app just about anywhere. Vercel has done a much better job with portability than you would typically expect from similar companies. The docs for Next are also just rock solid. It really feels like they cover everything. I'm not affiliated, just a happy developer using their framework. If you enjoy productivity on all levels, also performance, just go with Next. If you are a purist, go Vanilla.js. If you genuinely care about productivity, go with Svelte. React is unproductive and unintuitive. How to start a React project in 2023? Don't. Seriously, there is zero reason to use monstrous, painful software, unless you're a sadist. Use something like Solid, or better yet, go for a substantially better language like Ember, especially if you're a startup.